Some nights the sky holds a kind of stillness that feels almost deliberate, as if the whole world has agreed quietly to slow down with you. The stars sit exactly where they always sit. The dark outside the window feels unmoving, patient, complete. And yet underneath that stillness something vast is happening. Something that never stops, not even for a moment, not even now, as you lie here listening. If this feels like a good place to rest tonight, you are welcome to stay. There is no need to think too hard about anything. No need to hold on to every word. You can let your eyes close whenever they want to. You can let your body sink a little deeper into wherever it is resting. This is not a place that asks anything of you. Now, let's drift. Because tonight we are going to sit with a question, a soft one. The kind of question that does not need an answer right away, and maybe does not need one at all. It has to do with something you're doing right now without realizing it, without feeling it, without ever having chosen it. You're moving. Right now in this very moment, you are moving faster than almost anything you will ever experience directly in your life. And somehow none of it disturbs you. None of it reaches you at all. It seems that this is one of the quiet paradoxes of being alive on a spinning world. The ground beneath you, the walls around you, the bed holding your weight, all of it is turning, carried along a vast invisible arc through the dark. And still everything feels so still. Researchers have found that human beings are remarkably poor at sensing motion that is smooth and constant. It is the sudden shifts we notice, the lurch of a car breaking the dip of a plane through turbulence. But a motion that never changes, that has always been there since before you were born, since before anyone was born, becomes something the body simply stops noticing. It fades into the background of existence the way a hum can become silence if it never stops. And this motion we are speaking of is not small. Depending on where you are on the globe tonight, you are moving through space at a speed of somewhere around 1,000 kilometers an hour simply from the turning of the Earth beneath you. If you happen to be lying closer to the equator, that number climbs even higher. If you are further toward the poles, it eases, slows, becomes gentler, the way a record spins faster near its outer edge and softer near its center. None of this asks to be understood all at once. It is simply a fact sitting quietly in the dark, waiting to be noticed the way a familiar object in a room is only truly seen when the light falls on it differently. Scientists suggest that this turning has been happening for a very long time. Billions of years, in fact, long before oceans had names, long before anything with eyes existed to watch the horizon change. And it has never once paused. Day folding into night, night folding back into day, an unbroken rhythm older than memory itself, older than language, older than any word we might use to describe it. There is something almost tender in that thought, that long before there was anyone to feel the sunrise, the earth was already turning toward it, patient and unwatched, doing what it has always done. The mind quietly registers this kind of vastness differently than it registers ordinary facts. Psychologists often note that when people are asked to imagine truly large spans of time or truly large forces of nature, something in the chest tends to soften almost involuntarily. A kind of humility arrives uninvited and settles there. Not fear, not awe in the loud sense. Just a small private recognition that we are part of something far larger than the room we are lying in. And perhaps that is where tonight begins. Not with an answer, but with a question held loosely the way you might hold something you are not in a hurry to put down. What would it feel like if that turning ever slowed? If the great unseen motion carrying you through this night ever grew quiet? Not suddenly, not violently, just slower, and slower still, until one day the earth simply stopped turning beneath you. It is not something that is going to happen. Not tonight, not tomorrow, not within any span of time that touches your life or the lives of anyone you know. The Earth's spin is remarkably steady, and what little it does change happens over such enormous stretches of time that it barely counts as change at all, not on any scale a human life could measure. But that is precisely what makes the question so soft to sit with. It costs nothing to wonder. There is no danger in it, no urgency, no need to solve anything before your eyes grow heavy. It is simply an invitation to imagine slowly, gently, what a world without that turning might actually feel like. What would happen to the sky? What would happen to the wind? What would happen to the quiet clocks inside every living thing, ticking along in rhythm with a sun that rises and falls? Some scientists believe that questions like this one are useful not because they need solving, but because they let us see the ordinary world with new eyes. The next time you watch a sunset, you might remember that you are not simply watching light fade. You are watching the edge of the Earth's own motion carrying you gently away from the sun, the way a boat carries a passenger away from the shore without the passenger ever feeling the current beneath them. There is no need to hold any of this tightly. Let it move through you the way it wants to. Some of it might stay. Some of it might already be drifting off the way thoughts do late at night, softening at the edges, losing their shape. For now it is enough to know that somewhere beneath the stillness of this room, the vast silent machinery of the world is still turning just as it always has, carrying you without asking through the dark. And in a little while we will begin to feel what that turning actually does. The quiet forces it creates, the winds it shapes without anyone noticing, the invisible hand it leaves on almost everything that moves across this earth. But there is no rush to get there, not tonight. For now you can simply rest here inside this thought and let the turning carry you exactly where it always has. The turning of the earth is not something anyone had to teach you. Long before you understood what a planet was, your body already knew the rhythm of it. Morning light on closed eyelids, the particular blue of a sky just before dusk, hunger that arrives around the same hour, sleep that gathers weight at roughly the same time each night. Long before science had a name for it, the day itself had already written its rhythm into you. It seems that this rhythm runs so deep that we rarely stop to ask where it comes from. We simply live inside it the way a fish lives inside water without needing to notice the water at all. But if you were to step back just slightly and look at this rhythm from a small distance, you would see something quietly remarkable. Every single day and night you have ever lived, every sunrise you have watched or slept through, every dusk that ever coloured a window orange, has come from one continuous motion, the earth completing another turn. Not starting fresh each morning, not resetting overnight, but simply continuing something that has never stopped. Researchers have found that a single rotation from one sunrise to the next takes very close to 24 hours, though not exactly. The precise figure is a little under that, closer to 23 hours and 56 minutes for the Earth to complete one full turn relative to the distant stars. The extra few minutes we experience as a day come from the fact that the Earth is also travelling around the Sun at the same time, so it has to turn slightly further each day to catch the Sun in the same position again. Two motions layered quietly on top of each other. One, a spin, one a much longer, slower journey around a star. Both happening at once, both completely hidden from the senses. There is something so in imagining that layering. A small wheel turning mounted on a much larger wheel, turning even more slowly and neither wheel making a sound. For most of human history, no one imagined it this way at all. It may be that for thousands of years people looked up at the sky and simply trusted what their eyes told them, which was that the sun moved and the earth stayed still beneath it. It felt obvious. It felt like the only reasonable explanation. The ground does not sway. The horizon does not blur. Everything around us holds so perfectly steady that stillness seemed like the only honest conclusion. Scientists are still exploring exactly how ancient observers pieced together the first hints that something didn't quite add up, but slowly over centuries small inconsistencies began to gather. The way certain stars seemed to shift position depending on the season. The way ships disappeared hull first over the horizon, rather than simply shrinking into the distance. Small, quiet clues easy to miss individually, but harder to ignore once enough of them had accumulated. It took a very long time and a great deal of careful, patient observation before the idea finally took hold that it was not the sky turning around us, but us turning within it. There is a particular kind of proof for this that still exists today, one you may have seen without ever quite understanding what it was showing you. In museums and science halls around the world, a long pendulum hangs from a high ceiling, swinging slowly back and forth hour after hour. Over the course of a day, the direction of its swing appears to shift ever so slowly, rotating around the room. The pendulum itself is not turning. It is simply continuing to swing in the same direction it always has. It is the floor beneath it, the entire building, the entire ground you might be standing on that is quietly turning underneath it. Studies indicate that this experiment, first demonstrated in the middle of the 1800s, gave people something they had never had before. A way to feel the turning of the Earth indirectly through the patient, honest behavior of a swinging weight. Not through instruments hidden in a laboratory, not through complicated mathematics, but through something as simple and human as watching a pendulum slowly appear to change its path. There is something quietly moving in that idea, that the truth of something so enormous, so far beyond the scale of a single body, could be gently revealed through something as small and patient as a swinging weight in a quiet room. And yet even now, standing on solid ground, none of us feels the spin directly. The mind quietly registers stillness, even while the body is being carried through space at extraordinary speed. This is not a failure of the senses. It is simply how motion works, when everything around you is moving together at the same steady pace with nothing to compare it against. A person sleeping on a smoothly sailing ship feels no different than a person sleeping on land, so long as the ship's motion stays constant and calm. The Earth, in that sense, is the smoothest, largest, most patient ship any of us will ever travel on. Neuroscientists have observed that the brain builds its sense of stillness or movement almost entirely through comparison, through the small shifts and jolts that break a pattern rather than the pattern itself. A steady hum becomes silence. A constant motion becomes stillness. It may be that this is simply how a mind learns to live peacefully inside a moving world by quietly setting aside whatever never changes, so that its attention stays free for whatever does. There is a kind of mercy in that design if you sit with it for a moment. A mind that had to consciously track every motion of the turning Earth, every heartbeat of the planet beneath it, would likely never rest at all. Instead, the mind lets the turning fade into the background, the way this room around you might be fading into the background right now, holding you gently while your attention drifts elsewhere. The turning does something else too, something quieter still, because the Earth spins on a slight tilt, leaning at an angle, rather than standing perfectly upright as it moves around the sun. The amount of daylight reaching any one place slowly changes across the year. Longer days in one season, shorter, dimmer days in another. Not because the sun itself is changing, but because of the angle at which the light falls, shifting slowly with each turn, each orbit, each small adjustment in the tilt of the world beneath your feet. What we understand so far suggests that this tilt, this quiet lean in the Earth's spin, is responsible for nearly everything we call a season. The particular gold of autumn light, the long soft evenings of early summer, the early darkness that settles over winter afternoons, all of it traced back to an angle a leaner, slight and steady imperfection in the way the earth turns. There is something comforting somehow in learning that so much of what feels emotional about the changing seasons, the nostalgia of autumn, the hush of a winter evening, has its roots in something as plain and physical as an angle of tilt. As if the feelings themselves were built quietly and patiently out of geometry and light. None of this needs to be remembered in detail. It is enough to let it settle somewhere loosely the way a half-remembered dream settles once morning comes. What matters more is simply this, that the stillness you feel right now lying here in the dark has never actually been stillness at all. It has always been motion so smooth and so constant that it long ago became invisible to you. And perhaps that is not so different from other kinds of stillness. The quiet parts of a life that feel unmoving on the surface while underneath slowly, patiently something is still turning, still carrying you forward even when nothing seems to be happening at all. For now, there is nothing more to hold on to here. Just the sense of being carried gently the way you have always been carried, without ever needing to notice it. Somewhere beneath this rhythm, something else is quietly waiting. A pattern hidden inside the wind itself, shaped by the very same turning we have been sitting with tonight. We will come to it gently in time. For now you can simply let this thought soften and rest here a little longer. There is a particular kind of wind that only exists because the earth is turning. Not a strong wind, not a dramatic one, but a quiet curve hidden inside almost every large movement of air on this planet. It has no colour, no sound of its own, and yet it shapes storms, ocean currents, and the slow spiral of clouds seen from far above the earth. Scientists suggest that this hidden curve begins with something almost too simple to notice. As the Earth turns, different parts of its surface move at different speeds. Near the equator, the ground beneath your feet moves quickly, carried by the wide sweep of the planet's spin. Closer to the poles, that same spin covers far less distance, so the motion feels slower, gentler, more contained. The middle of the Earth rushes, the edges barely stir. Air does not know to expect this difference. When a pocket of air begins to move from one region to another, from the quick motion near the equator toward the slower motion near the poles or the other way around, it carries its original speed with it like a memory it cannot quite let go of. And so instead of moving in a straight line, the air appears to curve, not because anything is pushing it sideways, but because the ground beneath it is turning at a different pace than the air remembers. It seems that this gentle curving has a name. Researchers have found that it was first described with real mathematical clarity by a scientist in the early 1800s whose name became attached to the effect itself. But the truth of it existed long before anyone wrote it down. It existed the first time the wind ever moved across open water, the first time a storm ever began to spiral rather than simply blow in one direction. There is something almost tender in imagining that. A law of motion quietly present in every breeze that has ever crossed this earth, waiting patiently for someone to notice it and completely unbothered by how long that took. This curving motion shows itself most clearly in the great storms that form over the warm ocean water. Studies indicate that this is why storms in the northern half of the world spin one way counterclockwise, while storms in the southern half spin the opposite way clockwise, as if the earth itself had gently placed its hand on each side of the world and turned them in mirrored directions. Near the equator, where the effect grows too faint to organize a spin at all, storms rarely form with that same rotating structure. The curve needs enough distance from the center, enough of that slow, patient build-up to fully take shape. What we understand so far suggests that this same quiet force reaches far beyond storms. It shapes the great belts of wind that circle the globe, the ones that once carried sailing ships across oceans for months at a time, long before anyone understood why the winds blew the way they did. Sailors simply learned to trust them the way you might learn to trust a current in a river without needing to know exactly why it moves the way it does. It may be that this is one of the quieter examples of how something invisible can shape something enormous. No one designed the spiral of a hurricane. No one carved the path of the trade winds into the sky. They emerge slowly from nothing more than a spinning planet and the simple, honest memory that moving air carries with it. The same gentle curve reaches into the ocean as well, though far more slowly, far more patiently than it does in the air. Evidence suggests that surface currents, the great rivers of water that move within the ocean itself, are also nudged along curved paths by this same quiet effect. Warm water drifting from the equator toward higher latitudes does not travel in a straight line either. It spirals gently the way smoke spirals as it rises from a candle in a still room, curling almost lazily, as if in no particular hurry to arrive anywhere. There is a soft kind of poetry in knowing that the wind above your head and the water beneath the surface of some distant ocean are both being shaped by the exact same quiet law. Different substances, different speeds, different scales entirely, and yet both curving in response to the same slow turning of the world beneath them. None of this curving happens quickly. None of it happens with any urgency. It builds across hundreds of kilometers, sometimes thousands, which is part of why you will never notice it in ordinary life. It has no effect on the small familiar movements around you. The closing of a door, the pouring of water into a glass. Those distances are simply too small, too brief for the effect to leave any visible trace. The curve only reveals itself at the scale of storms, oceans, and the vast movement of air across an entire hemisphere. Psychologists often note that there is something quietly satisfying about learning that the world holds patterns like this. Patterns invisible at close range but unmistakable once you widen your view enough to see them. It may be part of why so many people find comfort in watching satellite images of storms from space, the smooth, deliberate spiral of clouds turning slowly over the ocean. There is nothing frightening in that image, even though it shows a storm. There is only a strange, quiet elegance to it, as if chaos seen from far enough away resolves itself into something that almost looks like calm. The brain tends to find a certain peace in symmetry like this, in patterns that repeat gently across very different scales. A storm curving one way in one half of the world, and the mirror of that same storm curving the opposite way on the other side. A predictability hidden inside something that up close might otherwise feel unpredictable or overwhelming. None of this needs to be held on too tightly tonight. It is enough to simply notice that the next time wind moves past a window, or the next time clouds drift slowly across a distant sky, there is a hidden curve inside that motion shaped by the quiet turning of the world beneath it. A shape so subtle it took humanity thousands of years to notice it was there at all. And it seems that this hidden curve is only the beginning of what the Earth's turning quietly shapes in ways that reach far closer to home than clouds or oceans ever could. There is a quieter layer to this one that most people never consider resting closer to the body than the sky ever does. The quieter layer we spoke of is not hidden in the sky or in the ocean, but in something far closer than that. It is hidden in the weight of your own body resting here in the dark in a way so subtle that no scale in an ordinary home could ever reveal it. It seems that the Earth is not a perfect sphere. For a very long time, people simply assumed it was a smooth and even ball turning quietly through space. But researchers have found that the same spinning motion we have been sitting with tonight has over billions of years gently reshaped the planet itself. The turning creates a faint outward push strongest at the equator, where the speed of the spin is greatest and almost absent near the poles, where the world barely seems to move at all. That outward push has ever so slowly allowed the middle of the Earth to swell outward just slightly, while the poles have remained a little flatter, a little closer to the core. The difference is small. The Earth is wider around the equator than it is from pole to pole by a distance of about 43 kilometers, which sounds significant until you remember the full size of the planet itself. Against a world that large 43 kilometers is closer to the gentle curve of a very slightly imperfect circle than any dramatic distortion. And yet that quiet imperfection is real, and it has consequences that reach all the way down to the body. Studies indicate that because of this subtle bulge and because of the way the outward push of spinning works against gravity, a person actually weighs slightly less standing at the equator than they would standing at one of the poles. Not enough to ever notice without very precise instruments. Not enough to change anything about how a body moves or feels or rests. But enough that scientists measuring gravity with extremely sensitive tools can detect the difference a few tenths of 1% quietly shifting, depending on where exactly on the globe you happen to be standing. There is something strangely intimate in that thought, that your own weight, the simple pull holding you down against this bed right now, is not entirely fixed. It shifts ever so slightly depending on your place on a turning world. Not because you have changed, only because the earth beneath you curves differently in different places and carries you at different speeds depending on where you rest. It may be that this is one of the quieter reminders that nothing about a spinning world is ever perfectly uniform. Even something as basic as gravity, something we tend to imagine as constant and unchanging everywhere, carries a faint fingerprint of the planet's motion within it. For centuries, no one knew this shape existed at all. Evidence suggests that the debate over whether the Earth was a perfect sphere or something subtly different occupied some of the sharpest minds of the 1700s. One line of thinking based on careful mathematics suggested the Earth should bulge slightly at the equator, flatten gently at the poles shaped by the same spinning force we have been speaking of tonight. Another line of thinking based on early measurements taken in France suggested the opposite, that the Earth might instead be slightly elongated toward the poles like a shape stretched rather than squeezed. To settle the disagreement, scientists did something remarkable for the time. They organized two separate expeditions, sending teams of researchers to opposite ends of the Earth. One expedition traveled to a region near the equator in what is now Ecuador, enduring difficult terrain and long exhausting years of careful measurement. Another expedition traveled north into the cold reaches of what is now Finland, measuring the exact same thing, the length of a degree of the Earth's curve, but in a very different climate under a very different sky. What we understand so far suggests that both expeditions eventually returned with an answer, and the answer confirmed the earlier prediction. The Earth truly was wider around its middle, flattened gently at its poles, exactly as the spinning motion of the planet would suggest. It took years of patient, difficult, physically demanding work carried out by people willing to travel to opposite corners of the world simply to measure something so small it could not be seen, only calculated. There is a quiet kind of devotion in that image. Scientists standing beneath entirely different skies, one team sweating beneath equatorial heat, the other bracing against northern cold, both measuring the same invisible curve of the same distant world, patiently piecing together a truth that neither could have proven alone. This subtle shape still matters today, though in ways most people never think about. The brain tends to imagine the Earth as a smooth, simple ball, the kind seen on a classroom globe. But engineers and scientists working with satellites, navigation systems, and long-distance travel have to account for the Earth's true shape with great precision, because even a small imperfection left unaccounted for can shift a calculation by a meaningful distance over long enough ranges. It seems that this same bulge is also part of why certain places on Earth are chosen for launching things into space. Locations closer to the equator carry the fastest natural spin of the planet, offering a gentle, invisible boost of speed to anything launched from there. A rocket leaving from a location near the equator is already moving faster simply by standing still on that particular patch of ground than a rocket leaving from somewhere closer to the poles. The Earth itself lends a small quiet assist born entirely from its own spin. Neuroscientists have observed that people often respond to details like this with a small private sense of wonder, the kind that doesn't need to be spoken aloud. Not the wide, sweeping wonder of looking up at a night sky full of stars, but a quieter version closer to home, discovering that the ground beneath your feet has secretly been part of something larger the whole time. That the very shape of the world, its faint imperfection, its slight and patient swelling at the middle, has been shaping things as enormous as space travel and as small and personal as the exact number on a bathroom scale. None of this needs to be remembered precisely. It is enough to simply carry the feeling of it. That the Earth beneath you is not perfectly round, not perfectly even, not perfectly still in its shape any more than it is still in its motion. It has been gently reshaped by its own turning, the same turning that carries you through the night right now unnoticed, unfelt, and endlessly patient. And it may be that this shape is only the surface of a much deeper story, one that reaches far below your feet into places no sunlight has ever touched, where the Earth's turning does something else entirely, something quieter, and in its own way something that keeps you safer than you might ever have imagined. Far below the surface of the ocean in places no sunlight has ever reached. Water moves in patterns that have almost nothing to do with wind and almost everything to do with the quiet turning of the Earth itself. It may be that when most people imagine the ocean, they imagine only its surface. The visible waves, the tide pulling gently at the shore, the wind stirring ripples across open water. But researchers have found that beneath all of that familiar motion, there are much slower, much deeper currents, some of them taking centuries to complete a single patient journey around the globe. These currents are shaped by many things, temperature, salt, the position of continents, but woven through nearly all of them is the same invisible influence we have already been sitting with tonight, the steady turning of the planet beneath the water. It seems that ocean currents, much like the great winds high above them, do not travel in perfectly straight lines. Warm water drifting away from the equator curves gently as it moves nudged sideways by the same quiet effect that bends the path of storms and shapes the spiral of clouds. Cold water sinking near the poles follows its own curved path as it slowly makes its way back toward warmer regions, deep beneath the surface, far from any wind or sunlight. Together, these curving currents form something scientists sometimes describe as a great slow conveyor belt circling the entire planet, carrying warmth from one place to another, carrying cold water back the other way, in a cycle so patient it can take well over 1,000 years to complete a single full loop. There is something quietly humbling in that number. 1,000 years for water to travel, a path that begins near the surface sinks into darkness, drifts silently across ocean basins, and eventually rises again into daylight somewhere else entirely, long after everyone who might have first set that water in motion has been gone for generations. Studies indicate that this same slow curling motion also shapes something closer to the surface, the great swirling currents visible even from space. Warm water gathering into wide rotating loops, some spinning clockwise, some spinning the opposite way depending on which half of the world they sit in, mirroring the very same pattern seen earlier in the great storms overhead. It seems the ocean and the atmosphere are shaped quietly by the very same law, each responding to the Earth's turning in its own way, one made of water, the other made of air, both curling gently around a planet that never stops moving beneath them. The mind quietly registers a certain comfort in symmetry like this, a pattern that repeats itself across such different scales, from the smallest eddy near a coastline to the vast, slow circulation of an entire ocean basin, all following the same soft, invisible curve. But turning is not the only way the Earth's motion shapes the ocean. There is another rhythm, entirely one tied not to the spin of the planet on its own axis, but to something gentler still, the quiet pull of the moon. Evidence suggests that as the Earth turns, different parts of its surface pass beneath the moon's gravity at different times throughout the day, and this passing pull is part of what creates the tides, the slow rise and fall of the sea along every coastline in the world. Because the Earth completes a full turn roughly once every 24 hours, most coastal places experience the ocean's rise and fall not once, but twice each day. The water reaching high along the shore, retreating and returning again, a rhythm as steady and unhurried as breath. What we understand so far suggests that this rhythm has shaped life along coastlines for as long as life has existed there at all. Certain creatures time their entire existence around it, emerging only when the water pulls back to a particular point, retreating the moment it begins to return. Some tiny sea creatures release their eggs into the water at specific tidal moments, timed so precisely that entire populations of a single species will do so within the very same narrow window, guided by a rhythm they never chose and could never explain, but somehow quietly always seem to know. There is something deeply moving in imagining that. A rhythm not written down anywhere, not taught, not remembered in any ordinary sense, and yet followed faithfully by countless generations of small, simple creatures, purely because the turning of the Earth and the pull of the moon have shaped their entire way of being alive. Psychologists often note that human beings too seem to find something quietly reassuring in tidal rhythms, even those of us who live far from any coastline. Perhaps it is the predictability of it, the knowledge that no matter what else changes in a day, the tide will rise, and the tide will fall exactly as it always has, exactly as it will continue to long after tonight has passed. There is a kind of trust built into a rhythm like that one that asks nothing of you, except to notice it if you choose to. None of this needs to be held with any effort tonight. It is enough to simply picture it softly, the way you might picture something half remembered from a childhood spent near water. Somewhere in the deep, dark parts of the ocean right now, ancient currents are continuing journeys begun long before you were born. Somewhere along a quiet shoreline, the tide is rising or falling, exactly on schedule, guided by forces far above and far below the water's surface. And it seems that this rhythm reaches even further than the ocean itself, down into the very core of the Earth, where the planet's turning does something else entirely, something quieter, something almost impossible to picture, and yet something that touches every single day of your life, whether you have ever thought about it or not. Deep beneath your feet, further than any ocean, further than any root or stone, there is a place where the Earth's turning creates something almost impossible to picture. A quiet, invisible shield wrapped gently around the entire planet, protecting everything alive upon it. It seems that at the very center of the Earth, thousands of kilometers below where you are resting right now, there is a core made mostly of iron and nickel. The innermost part of that core is solid under such immense pressure that the metal there cannot move at all, no matter how hot it becomes. But surrounding that solid center is a different layer entirely, a vast ocean of liquid metal, molten and heavy, flowing slowly in the dark heat of the Earth's interior. Researchers have found that this liquid metal does not sit still. It moves slowly and constantly, driven by heat, rising from the solid core beneath it, the way warm water might rise gently through a pot before it ever reaches a boil. But this movement is not simple. Because the Earth is turning the same way it turns everything else we have spoken of tonight, that slow rising, flowing metal is also gently twisted, curled into long looping patterns. The same quiet curving effect that shapes ocean currents and storms, only here deep underground, working on liquid iron instead of water or wind. There is something almost dreamlike in imagining that. A hidden ocean of molten metal thousands of kilometers beneath your bed right now, slowly curling and turning in the dark, following the very same quiet law that shapes the wind moving somewhere above your rooftop tonight. Studies indicate that this movement of liquid metal is not simply decorative, it is essential. As the molten iron flows and curls, it generates electric currents within itself, and those electric currents in turn generate a magnetic field, one that extends far beyond the surface of the Earth, reaching out into space itself. Scientists often describe this process using the word dynamo, comparing the Earth's core to a kind of natural generator quietly producing something invisible and enormous, purely through the patient ongoing motion of turning metal. It may be that few people ever think about this while going through an ordinary day, and yet this same magnetic field is working at every single moment of that day. It surrounds the entire planet like a vast invisible bubble, deflecting streams of charged particles that constantly flow outward from the sun. Without that shield, those particles would strike the Earth's atmosphere far more directly, slowly, stripping away the very air that makes the planet livable, the way solar wind has done to certain other worlds in this solar system that never developed a magnetic field of their own or lost it long ago. There is a strange, quiet comfort in learning that something so deep, so hidden, so entirely outside of daily awareness has been steadily protecting every breath you have ever taken. Not through anything visible, not through anything that could ever be seen or touched, only through the patient turning of metal thousands of kilometers below the surface, doing its work in complete darkness, without applause, without recognition, simply because the planet has always turned this way. What we understand so far suggests that this magnetic field reveals itself occasionally in places far from where most people live, through soft curtains of coloured light that ripple across the night sky near the northern and southern edges of the world. These lights appear when charged particles from the sun, deflected and guided by the Earth's magnetic field, are funneled gently toward the poles, where they interact with the upper atmosphere and glow in shifting colours of green and sometimes pink or pale violet. Evidence suggests that people who witness this light for the first time often describe a feeling that goes beyond simple visual beauty, something closer to being quietly overwhelmed in the gentlest possible sense, as if the sky itself were revealing a secret that had been there all along, hidden just beyond the edge of ordinary sight, made visible only because of a shield. Most people never think about, generated by a process most people never learn. Neuroscientists have observed that experiences like this, witnessing something vast and unexplainable directly with your own eyes, often leave a lasting emotional imprint different from simply reading or hearing about the same phenomenon. There is something about direct sensory contact with the scale of the natural world that settles differently in memory, softer and somehow more permanent. None of this needs to be pictured in perfect detail tonight. It is enough to simply hold the shape of the idea that deep within the Earth, in complete darkness, liquid metal has been turning for billions of years, generating a field of protection so vast it reaches beyond the sky itself. All of it made possible by the same quiet spin that carries you gently through this very night. There is a quieter layer to this one that most people never consider. Because if that turning ever slowed, if the deep metal ocean beneath your feet ever grew still, the shield above you would not vanish all at once. It would fade slowly, gently, the way so many things in this story have moved, not suddenly but softly over a span of time too long for any single life to witness. And what that fading might mean for the sky above you, for the light reaching this world, for the quiet safety wrapped so invisibly around every living thing, is something we will let ourselves drift toward gently a little further into this night. If the Earth's turning ever truly stopped, the shield beneath your feet would fade slowly, and something else would begin to change as well, something closer to the sky itself, closer to the very air moving across your skin right now, however still that air might feel tonight. It seems that one of the quiet gifts of a turning world is something most people never think to be grateful for because it has never once let them down. Warmth spread gently and continuously across the entire globe, rather than trapped forever in one place or lost forever in another. Researchers have found that a planet's rotation plays a central role in how heat moves through its atmosphere. As the Earth turns, every region eventually faces the sun directly, and every region eventually turns away from it again, in a rhythm so constant it becomes invisible. Because of this, no single place on Earth is left in permanent daylight, endlessly gathering heat with nothing to release it, and no single place is left in permanent darkness, endlessly losing warmth with nothing to restore it. The turning itself becomes a kind of gentle redistribution, carrying warmth around the planet the way a slow hand might stir warmth evenly through a cup rather than letting it settle unevenly at the bottom. There is something quietly moving in imagining a world without that redistribution. If the Earth's rotation ever came to a complete stop, one half of the planet would eventually face the sun without pause for what would effectively become one endless day. The other half would fall into a darkness with no morning waiting on the other side of it. Studies indicate that the side permanently lit would likely grow extraordinarily hot over time, its air rising and thinning under constant unbroken sunlight, while the side left in permanent shadow would slowly grow colder and colder, losing heat into space with nothing left to replace it. It may be that the middle ground between these two extremes, a narrow band circling the planet where day and night would forever balance at the edge of light, is the closest thing such a world could offer to comfort. Scientists are still exploring exactly how such a boundary region might behave, drawing partly from what has already been observed on other worlds far beyond our own solar neighborhood planets that orbit so closely to their stars that one side always faces the light, while the other remains forever in darkness. Astronomers sometimes describe these distant worlds as tidally locked, a stillness not of rotation but of gravitational pull, holding one face permanently toward its star, and the mind quietly tends to picture such places as strange and cold at the edges, warm and blinding at the center, with only a thin, fragile ring of balance running somewhere in between. There is a certain hush in imagining a place like that. Not devastation, not chaos, simply a kind of profound stillness. A world shaped entirely by extremes with only the narrowest space left for anything resembling gentleness. But our own planet has never had to face that stillness, and evidence suggests that it likely never will not on any scale of time that touches human life. The turning we've been speaking of tonight is a remarkably steady slowing by only the smallest fraction of a second over the course of an entire century, a change so slow it would take many millions of years to become in any way noticeable. What we understand so far suggests that this gentle, gradual slowing is caused mostly by the pull of the moon, tugging softly at the Earth's oceans, absorbing the tiniest whisper of the planet's motion with each tide that rises and falls. There is a quiet kind of trust that comes from learning something like this, that the very stability keeping this world livable does not come from nothing changing at all, but from something changing so slowly, so gently, that an entire human life can pass without ever brushing against it. Because the Earth continues to turn at a steady pace, warmth moves continuously through its atmosphere in the form of great circulating patterns of air rising near the equator, where sunlight falls most directly, drifting slowly toward higher latitudes, cooling, sinking and eventually returning again in wide looping cells that circle the globe, much like the ocean currents we spoke of earlier tonight. Scientists suggest that without the Earth's rotation, these patterns would look entirely different, likely forming just one or two enormous circulations, rather than the several distinct bands that currently divide the planet into deserts, tropical regions, and temperate zones. The very existence of the world's climate patterns, The dry belts near certain latitudes, the lush, humid regions near others, owes itself in part to the quiet architecture created by a turning planet. The brain tends to imagine climate as something separate from motion, as though weather simply happens on its own, disconnected from anything mechanical or physical. But psychologists often note that once people understand the deep invisible link between rotation and climate, something shifts quietly in how the sky is seen afterward. A cloud passing overhead is no longer just a cloud. It becomes part of a much larger circulation, one shaped, however distantly, by the same spin, carrying you gently through this very night. There is something soothing in that connection once it settles. The idea that the mild evenings, the gentle seasons, the climate patterns that allow forests to grow and rivers to keep flowing and life to continue as it always has, all trace back, at least in part, to something as fundamental and unassuming as a planet simply continuing to turn. Neuroscientists have observed that people often find comfort in learning about balance systems like this, mechanisms quietly working behind the scenes to prevent extremes, even when those systems are entirely unconscious, entirely automatic and completely outside of anyone's control. There is a kind of reassurance in discovering that some forms of balance do not require effort or attention at all. They simply exist, built into the deep architecture of how a planet moves, asking nothing of the world except to keep turning as it always has. If you were to imagine standing somewhere along that narrow band we spoke of earlier, the delicate borderline between permanent light and permanent shadow on a world that had truly stopped its spin, it may be that the light there would fall in a way unfamiliar to anything you have ever known. Not the shifting, changing light of a normal day, rising, brightening, softening, again toward an evening, but something fixed, unmoving. The sun frozen at a single point along the horizon, forever caught between rising and setting, never quite completing either. It is a strange image to hold, not frightening, exactly, but deeply unfamiliar. A stillness so complete it becomes almost impossible to picture with any real clarity, precisely because nothing in ordinary human experience has ever offered anything like it. It seems that this is part of why scientists find such stillness so useful to imagine, even while knowing it will likely never happen to the world we actually live on. By picturing what a world without rotation might feel like, researchers gain a clearer sense of just how much the ordinary turning of our own planet quietly provides. Every mild morning, every gentle transition from day into evening, every soft shifting quality of light throughout an afternoon, all of it made possible by a motion so constant, so deeply woven into the fabric of daily life, that it becomes almost impossible to notice until it is imagined away entirely. There is no need to hold on to that image tightly tonight. Let it rest gently in the mind the way an unfamiliar landscape might rest in memory, after a dream vivid for a moment and then slowly softening at the edges. For now, it is simply worth knowing that the Earth's steady turning is quietly responsible for far more than day and night alone. It shapes the very balance of warmth and cold across the entire planet, a balance so seamless, so continuous that it rarely asks to be noticed at all. And there is still another place where that same steady turning reaches somewhere far closer than climate or sky, somewhere resting quietly inside your own body, keeping time in ways you may have never fully considered before tonight. Somewhere behind your eyes right now, in a small cluster of cells no larger than a grain of rice, part of your body is quietly keeping track of the Earth's turning without you ever having taught it how. It seems that deep within the brain, just above the point where the optic nerves cross paths, there rests a tiny structure that neuroscientists have observed acts almost like a conductor keeping time for nearly every other system in the body. This structure receives quiet signals from the eyes, not about shapes or colours, but simply about light and darkness, and uses that information to keep a steady internal rhythm running hour after hour, day after day. Researchers have found that this rhythm does not depend entirely on the world outside. In careful studies, when people have spent extended periods in environments completely cut off from natural light, living in deep caves or specially designed rooms with no clocks and no clues about the time of day, their bodies still settled into a rhythm remarkably close to 24 hours. Not identical, but close, as though something inside the body already carried a memory of the Earth's rotation independent of the sun itself, a rhythm written into biology long before any single life began. There is something quietly moving in that discovery, that the turning we have spoken of all this evening, the vast invisible motion carrying you through the dark right now, has left its imprint not only on wind and oceans and the deep metal heart of the planet, but on something as small and personal as the rhythm of your own resting body. Studies indicate that this internal clock, often described as the body's circadian rhythm, quietly influences far more than simply when you feel tired or awake. Body temperature rises and falls slightly across the day, usually lowest in the deepest part of the night and gradually warming again toward morning. A hormone called melatonin begins to rise gently in the evening as darkness falls, encouraging a soft sense of drowsiness to settle over the body. Another hormone, cortisol, tends to rise instead in the hours just before waking, quietly preparing the body for a return to alertness long before the eyes ever open. It may be that none of this happens because you decide it should. It happens quietly, automatically, the way a tide rises and falls without asking permission from the shore it touches. Somewhere inside you right now, this rhythm is continuing exactly as it always has, regardless of whether you're paying it any attention at all. What we understand so far suggests that this internal clock exists not only in the brain, but in nearly every cell of the body. Evidence suggests that cells in the liver, the skin, even individual muscles carry their own small, quiet rhythms. Tiny clocks ticking away independently, all loosely coordinated by that small structure near the center of the brain, the way distant musicians might follow the same soft, unseen conductor, each playing their own part but somehow staying gently in time with one another. There is a certain wonder in imagining that. Trillions of individual cells, each carrying its own faint echo of day and night, all quietly synchronized to the same ancient rhythm, one that began long before any of those cells existed in the earliest days of life on a turning planet. Scientists suggest that this rhythm did not appear suddenly. It likely developed slowly over an immense span of time, as early forms of life gradually adapted to the predictable pattern of light and darkness created by the Earth's rotation. Organisms that could anticipate the coming of night, preparing quietly in advance, rather than reacting only once. Darkness arrive may have held a small but meaningful advantage over those that could not. Over countless generations, that advantage may have shaped biology itself, weaving the rhythm of the turning Earth directly into the chemistry of living cells. It seems that traces of this same rhythm can be found not only in humans, but in an enormous range of other living things. Certain flowers open and close their petals at roughly the same time each day, even when kept in a darkened room with no light cues at all. Some sea creatures rise toward the surface of the ocean each night and sink again each morning, following a rhythm passed down through countless generations, never taught, only inherited. Even simple organisms far too small to see with the naked eye have been found to carry internal rhythms echoing the same 24-hour pattern, as though the memory of the Earth's turning had settled itself into life at nearly every scale imaginable. There is something quietly comforting in imagining that. A rhythm so fundamental that it reaches from the smallest visible organism all the way to the complexity of a human body resting here now in this exact moment. A rhythm shared in some small way with nearly every living thing that has ever existed on this turning world. Psychologists often note that this internal clock plays a deep and often underappreciated role in emotional well-being, not only physical health. When that rhythm falls out of alignment with the actual rising and setting of the sun through irregular sleep or long periods without natural light, people often report not only tiredness but a subtle, persistent unease, a feeling of being quietly out of step with the world even when nothing else seems obviously wrong. It may be that this is part of why moments like this one, resting quietly, as darkness settles in gentle agreement with the natural rhythm of the earth's turning, tend to feel so peaceful. The body is not fighting against anything. It is simply doing what it has always known how to do, settling gently into the exact rhythm it was shaped for over countless generations on a world that has never once stopped turning beneath it. The brain tends to interpret this kind of alignment, body and rhythm moving together, rather than against each other, as a subtle form of safety. Not the dramatic safety of danger avoided, but something quieter and more constant. The safety of things unfolding exactly as they are meant to, without struggle, without resistance, the way a river moves easily along a path it has followed for centuries. None of this needs to be understood in scientific detail tonight. It is enough to simply feel it. That somewhere inside you right now, that small structure near the center of your brain is quietly reading the darkness around you, gently encouraging warmth to lower thoughts, to slow awareness, to soften exactly the way it has for every person who has ever rested in darkness before you, going back further than memory, further than history, further than any single word could reach. There is a particular kind of trust in letting that rhythm do what it already knows how to do, not forcing sleep, not chasing it, simply allowing the body's own ancient clock tuned so carefully across so much time to carry you gently toward rest the same way it always has, the same way it always will. And it seems that this quiet internal rhythm is only one part of a much larger story, one that reaches beyond biology, into something closer to memory itself, into the way the body seems to hold on to certain patterns long after the reasons for them have faded from conscious thought. That is a thread we will let ourselves follow gently a little further into this night. The turning we have followed through wind and water and the quiet clock inside your own body has left behind traces even older than memory itself, hidden inside the shells of creatures that lived hundreds of millions of years before anything resembling a human first opened its eyes. It seems that certain sea creatures, particularly ancient corals, grew in a way that recorded time, almost like the rings inside a tree. As these small organisms built their skeletons layer by layer, they added a fine, delicate ridge with each passing day, and a slightly thicker band with each passing year. Scientists are still exploring fossil corals that lived hundreds of millions of years ago, carefully counting those daily ridges preserved in stone, and what they've found is quietly remarkable. The number of daily ridges within a single year's growth band does not match the number of days in our year today. Researchers have found that in fossils from around 400 million years ago, a single year appears to have contained closer to 400 days, rather than the 365 we count today. Not because the Earth took any less time to circle the Sun, but because each individual day was shorter. The Earth in that distant era was spinning faster, completing a full turn in something closer to 22 hours rather than 24. There is something deeply moving in imagining that. A creature with no eyes, no memory, no understanding of time in any way we would recognize quietly recording the exact speed of a spinning planet within the architecture of its own body layer by patient layer for millions of years, without ever knowing it was keeping a record at all. Studies indicate that this gradual slowing of the Earth's spin, the same gentle process we touched on earlier tonight, tied closely to the Moon's quiet pull upon the oceans, has been unfolding for the entire span of the planet's history. Each day ever so slightly longer than the one before, it stretched out gradually over hundreds of millions of years, the way a very long, very slow breath might slowly deepen without anyone noticing the exact moment it changed. What we understand so far suggests that other ancient organisms carry similar hidden records. Certain shelled creatures called stromatolites among the oldest forms of life known to have existed on Earth, formed in delicate layers influenced by daily and tidal rhythms, preserving faint evidence of a world spinning at a different pace. Orbited by a moon that once sat closer, pulling more strongly before slowly drifting outward to the distance it holds today, it may be that there is something quietly reassuring in learning that time itself, the very length of a day, has never been fixed. It has always been changing so slowly that no single life could ever notice, and yet so surely that stone itself remembers what living memory cannot. But the Earth's turning has left behind more than fossils. Evidence suggests that many living creatures today still carry a far more active connection to the planet's motion, not through the length of a day, but through the very magnetic field created by that motion deep within the Earth's core. Neuroscientists have observed that certain birds appear capable of sensing the Earth's magnetic field directly, using it as a kind of invisible compass during long seasonal migrations that span thousands of kilometers. Some studies suggest this sense may be linked to a light-sensitive protein located within the eye itself, allowing certain birds to perceive subtle variations in magnetic alignment as gentle shifts overlaid across their normal vision, a faint pattern most humans will never have any way of imagining. There is something quietly astonishing in that idea. A bird lifting into the night sky, guided not only by stars, but by an invisible field, generated deep within the turning heart of the planet beneath it. A field it can somehow perceive directly the way you or I might perceive the warmth of sunlight on skin. Sea turtles, too, appear to carry a similar sense. Researchers have found that young sea turtles upon hatching often travel thousands of kilometers across open ocean, only to return years later to nest on the very same stretch of coastline where they themselves once hatched. Scientists suggest that these turtles may imprint on the specific magnetic signature of their birth beach, carrying that invisible signature with them for years across entire ocean basins, before eventually finding their way back to almost the exact same patch of sand. It seems that some fish, too, particularly certain species of salmon, rely on a similar sense to navigate their way back to the precise river where they were born, sometimes after years spent far out in open ocean. The mind quietly registers a kind of wonder in imagining that. A river among thousands of rivers, a beach among thousands of beaches, and a small, ordinary creature finding its way home, guided by nothing more than a memory of magnetism quietly gifted to it by a planet that has been generating that same field for billions of years. Psychologists often note that stories like these tend to resonate with people in a way that goes beyond simple curiosity. Perhaps because there is something universally understood in the idea of finding one's way home, even when the path is invisible, even when the guidance cannot be seen or touched, or fully explained. It may be that every living thing in its own way carries some quiet instinct for return, some faint internal compass, guiding it gently back toward where it began. None of this needs to be remembered in exact detail. It is enough to simply let the feelings settle, that the same turning earth carrying you gently through this night has also for millions upon millions of years been quietly guiding creatures far smaller and far different from yourself back toward the places they were always meant to find again. And it seems that this idea of finding one's way, of something ancient and patient guiding a return, echoes in a quieter form somewhere else as well, somewhere closer to rest itself, closer to the particular stillness that settles over a mind beginning gently to let go of the day behind it. There is a particular kind of stillness that arrives just before sleep, one that scientists have spent a long time trying to understand, and one that may have far more to do with the Earth's own rhythm than most people ever realize. It seems that as the body begins to settle into rest, the brain does not simply switch off. Researchers have found that it passes through a series of distinct stages, each with its own particular pattern of activity, moving gradually from light drowsiness into deeper and deeper stillness, before eventually reaching a stage where the eyes begin to move gently beneath closed lids and dreaming begins. What we understand so far suggests that this entire sequence follows its own internal rhythm, repeating in cycles roughly 90 minutes long, over and over throughout the course of a single night. Early cycles tend to contain more of the deep restorative stillness the body seems to need most. Later cycles closer to morning tend to contain longer stretches of that lighter dreaming stage. It is not a single uniform darkness. It is closer to a slow layered descent, and then a gradual gentle return repeated several times before morning finally arrives. There is something quietly beautiful in imagining that sleep itself is not simply an absence of wakefulness, but a rhythm of its own nested gently within the much larger rhythm of the turning earth. The way a smaller wheel might turn quietly within a much larger one, each completing its own private cycle several times over before the greater cycle of day and night comes around again. Evidence suggests that this internal sleep rhythm remains closely tied to the same 24-hour pattern we spoke of earlier, the pattern shaped so long ago by the steady turning of the planet. Even in complete isolation from natural light, even in environments carefully designed to remove every external cue about the passage of time, the body still tends to settle into something close to this same rhythm, cycling through wakefulness and rest in patterns that echo the length of an ordinary day, as though the memory of the sun rising and setting had been folded permanently into the architecture of the mind itself. It may be that this is one of the quieter forms of inheritance a person carries. Not a memory in the ordinary sense, nothing that could be recalled or described in words, but something older and steadier than memory. A rhythm passed down unbroken generation after generation, all the way back to the earliest ancestors who ever closed their eyes beneath a darkening sky. Psychologists often note that the transition into sleep tends to bring with it a particular quality of thought, looser, less structured drifting, more freely between ideas than the focused, organized thinking of daytime. The brain tends to interpret this looser state not as a malfunction, but as a kind of necessary softening, a gentle loosening of the tight, careful boundaries the mind holds during waking hours. Some researchers believe this looser thinking plays an important role in memory itself, quietly sorting and settling the experiences of the day, deciding in some wordless way what to hold on to and what to let drift gently out of reach. There is a certain grace in imagining that process, the mind in the quiet hours of early sleep gently sifting through everything. It gathered during the light, keeping what matters, releasing what does not. The way a tide might carry certain things gently back out to sea while leaving others resting softly on the shore. Neuroscientists have observed that during the deepest stages of sleep, the brain also appears to engage in something almost like cleaning. Fluid moves more freely through the spaces between brain cells during this deep stillness, helping to clear away certain waste products that accumulate gradually throughout a busy wakeful day. It seems that this quiet process happens almost entirely during the deepest, earliest cycles of the night, as though the body understood without ever being told that certain kinds of care can only happen in true stillness. There is something tender in that idea, that rest is not simply the mind stepping aside so the body can pause. It is an active, careful process, the body quietly tending to itself in ways that require nothing from you, except your willingness to let go, and to trust that something gentle and necessary is happening, even while you are not there to witness it. It seems that many cultures throughout history sensed something of this truth long before modern science ever described it in such detail. Ancient traditions across very different parts of the world often treated the hours of darkness not merely as an absence of activity, but as a distinct and valuable time in their own right, a time for healing, for quiet reflection, for allowing the body to restore itself in ways the busy hours of daylight simply could not offer. Long before anyone understood brainwaves or memory consolidation or the quiet clearing of the mind during deep stillness, people already seemed to sense intuitively that darkness carried its own particular gift. The mind, it seems, has been keeping something still and patient all along, long before any of tonight's words were spoken, resting quietly beneath the surface of ordinary awareness, waiting for exactly this kind of stillness to finally be allowed to unfold. And there is a gentler layer still waiting beneath even this something closer to comfort itself, closer to the particular kind of safety the body seems to search for as it finally lets the day fall away completely. That is where we will let this drift carry us next, softly and without any hurry at all. Somewhere beneath conscious thought, as darkness deepens and the body settles further into rest, something quietly ancient begins to stir, not memory exactly, but something closer to instinct. A slow, patient search for safety, one that has been running in the background of every human life for longer than history itself. It seems that the body's readiness for sleep is deeply tied to a gentle drop in temperature, one that begins in the evening and continues slowly through the early hours of night. Researchers have found that the body's core temperature falls by roughly 0.5 degree to a full degree as evening turns to night, a small quiet shift hardly noticeable on its own, but closely linked to the release of that same hormone we spoke of earlier, the one that gently encourages drowsiness to settle in. As the body cools, blood vessels near the surface of the skin tend to widen slightly, allowing a little more warmth to escape from the hands and feet, which is part of why they sometimes feel a touch cooler just before sleep finally arrives. There is something quietly moving in imagining that. A body preparing for rest, not through effort but through release, letting a small amount of warmth drift outward into the surrounding air, the way a held breath might finally be allowed to soften and slow. Studies indicate that this same cooling process is part of why the temperature of a room can matter so much for comfortable sleep. A space that is slightly cool tends to support this natural drop far more easily than a space that stays warm throughout the night. The body, in a sense, is always quietly negotiating with its surroundings, searching for the particular balance that allows it to let go most completely. It may be that this search for balance reaches back much further than any single night. Evolutionary biologists have long noted that early humans did not sleep the way many of us do now, alone behind closed doors in private rooms. For an enormous stretch of human history, sleep took place in groups gathered close together, often near a shared fire surrounded by the presence of others. Safety in that world was rarely something a single body could guarantee for itself. It came instead from proximity, from the quiet reassurance of not being alone in the dark. Scientists suggest that traces of this ancient pattern may still linger somewhere within the nervous system today, even in a world where most people now sleep in private enclosed spaces, often quite far from anyone else. There is a particular part of the nervous system sometimes described as the body's rest and restore pathway that appears to respond gently to certain cues of safety, slow, steady breathing, nearby the low murmur of a familiar voice, a sense of enclosure rather than open exposure. Evidence suggests that these cues even now can subtly encourage the body to relax more fully, to lower its guard just a little further, the way it might have once relaxed beside the glow of a fire, surrounded by others who are also quietly watching the dark. There is something tender in that thought, especially for anyone resting alone tonight. that the comfort of a soft voice, low and steady in the dark, may be tapping into something far older than language itself, an ancient signal the body still recognizes even without knowing exactly why. The mind quietly registers safety through several small physical signals, most of which happen entirely outside of conscious awareness. Neuroscientists have observed that as a person relaxes deeply, heart rate tends to slow, breathing tends to lengthen and deepen, and a particular nerve running from the brain down through the chest and abdomen, sometimes called the body's calming nerve, becomes more active, gently easing the body out of alertness and into a state closer to rest. This shift does not need to be forced. It tends to happen naturally quietly whenever the body senses enough safety to finally let go. It seems that certain simple physical sensations can help support this shift. A gentle weight resting across the body, the steady rhythm of slow, even breathing. Warmth without being too warm. All of these appear to send small wordless signals to the nervous system. Reassurances that nothing needs to be defended against right now. That stillness is not only permitted, but psychologists often note that this search for safety before sleep is not a flaw or a weakness of the modern mind. It is simply an old patient system doing exactly what it has always done. Quietly checking the surroundings, quietly listening for danger, and quietly standing down once it finds none. In many ways, the entire architecture of a peaceful night's rest depends on this ancient, careful watchfulness finally being allowed to rest as well. There is a particular kind of trust in tonight's darkness, one that may be worth sitting with for a moment. No sudden movement is expected of you. No decision needs to be made. No danger is waiting in the quiet space around you right now. And somewhere deep within the nervous system, that message is likely already being received softly, the same way it has been received by countless generations before you, each one finding their own particular way of feeling safe enough to close their eyes. What we understand so far suggests that this deep patient search for safety is closely woven into the very rhythm we have followed all evening, the same turning of the earth that shapes day and night, warmth and cold waking and rest. As darkness falls and has always fallen at roughly the same steady pace, generation after generation the nervous system has had all the time it needed to learn slowly and thoroughly that darkness itself is not a threat. It is simply part of the rhythm. It always has been. It may be that this is one of the quietest, most patient forms of trust the body carries. Not something learned in a single lifetime, but something inherited, refined slowly across countless nights, countless generations, each one adding a small additional layer of certainty that the dark in the end is simply where rest is meant to happen. There is no need to search for that safety tonight. It seems that it is already here, quietly present, waiting only for permission to be noticed. And as that permission settles in gently without effort, there is still a little further this night can carry you closer now to something that feels less like understanding and more like simply softly being held. The night has carried you a long way already, through wind, through water, through the deep patient turning of a planet. You will likely never fully see the whole of only feel quietly beneath you. It seems fitting now to let the science soften a little further, the way light softens at the edge of evening, not disappearing all at once, but slowly losing its sharpness, its edges, until what remains is something gentler than fact, something closer to feeling. Researchers have found that the human body across an ordinary lifetime will spend roughly a third of its time asleep, a third of every life given over entirely to rest, to darkness, to a stillness the body seems to insist upon, no matter how busy or full the waking hours might be. It is easy to think of sleep as something taken away from a day, a kind of pause between the parts that matter. But evidence suggests something closer to the opposite. That rest is not a pause in living. is one of the ways a body continues to live well. There is something quietly reassuring in that thought, that closing your eyes tonight is not a small surrender, but a kind of participation in a rhythm this planet has been offering to every living thing upon it for longer than any single memory could hold. It may be that the turning we spoke of earlier tonight, that vast invisible motion carrying you through the dark without ever asking to be noticed, has always been less about distance and more about return. Every day the same sun rising again. Every night the same darkness settling gently back into place. Not repetition in the tired sense of the word, but something closer to a promise quietly kept over and over for billions of years without a single night ever being missed. Studies indicate that the living things across the entire planet, from the smallest organisms to the largest, have shaped themselves around this promise. Not because they understood it, not because they had any choice in the matter, but because a world that turns so reliably, so gently, so completely without exception becomes something living, things can build their entire existence upon, roots that know when to grow, wings that know when to lift, bodies like yours that know somewhere far beneath conscious thought exactly when it is time to rest. There is a kind of quiet devotion in that. A planet that has never once broken its rhythm, not for war, not for grief, not for anything that has ever happened upon its surface. Turning gently on indifferent in the softest possible sense, offering the same steady day and the same steady night to every living thing without asking for anything in return. The mind quietly registers safety in patterns like this, patterns so old, so unbroken that trusting them requires no effort at all. You have never had to teach your body to expect the night to come. It already knew. It has always known. Somewhere in the deep, unspoken architecture of who you are, a memory older than language has simply been waiting patiently for exactly this moment, this darkness, this stillness. It seems that so much of what we have spoken of tonight, the wind that curves without anyone pushing it, the tides that rise without anyone asking them to the magnetic hush, deep within the earth, the ancient rhythm ticking quietly behind your own eyes, all of it points toward the same soft truth. That very little of what keeps you safe, what keeps you held, what keeps you gently moving through your days and nights was ever something you had to build yourself. Most of it was simply given, quietly, patiently, long before you arrived and long after you rest. There is no need to carry any of it forward with effort now. Let the facts loosen. Let the details drift a little further from focus. What matters in these final quiet minutes is not remembering, but simply feeling the shape of what has been shared. A planet turning gently in the dark, a shield invisible and ancient wrapped softly around everything alive, a rhythm older than memory resting even now inside your chest. You do not need to hold on to the numbers. You do not need to recall the names of scientists or the exact span of centuries or the precise language of anything spoken tonight. All of that can be released now gently, the way a hand slowly opens after holding something for a long while. What remains instead is simpler, softer. The sense that you are part of something vast and unbroken. The sense that this stillness right now is not separate from the world, but woven directly into it. The sense that somewhere far beneath you, the earth continues turning exactly as it always has, exactly as it always will. Long after this night has passed, long after every worry from today has quietly faded into something smaller, something farther away. There is nothing left to explain, nothing left to understand before you can rest. Only the dark, only the quiet, only the same soft turning that has always carried you gently towards sleep. Let it carry you now. The turning we have followed all night is at this very moment doing something it has never once stopped doing since long before you were born. Somewhere on this planet right now, the line between day and night is quietly sweeping forward the way it always does, unhurried, unbroken, moving gently across oceans and mountain and sleeping cities you'll never see. It seems that this line has a name, though it is rarely spoken aloud. Scientists sometimes call it the Terminator, not in any dramatic sense, but simply as a word for the soft boundary where daylight ends and darkness begins. Researchers have found that this boundary is never still. It moves continuously around the globe following the Earth's turning, crossing roughly 1,600 kilometers of ground every single hour, gliding silently over deserts and coastlines and quiet stretches of open water. There is something deeply moving in imagining that line right now. Somewhere someone is watching it arrive as a sunrise color slowly returning to a sky that held only stars a few minutes before. Somewhere else someone is watching it leave the last warm light slipping below a horizon, giving way gently to evening. Neither of them may be thinking about you, and yet you are connected to both of them by the very same line drawn slowly around the same turning whirl. It may be that this is one of the quietest kinds of togetherness a person could ever be part of, not chosen, not arranged, simply true every hour of every day for every person who's ever lived beneath this sky. Evidence suggests that the Earth's gentle tilt, the same lean responsible for the seasons, is kept remarkably steady by something else entirely, something that has been present in nearly every part of tonight's story without ever stepping fully into the light itself. The moon. What we understand so far suggests that the moon's steady gravitational pull acts almost like a quiet hand resting gently on the Earth's axis, keeping its tilt from wandering too far in either direction. Without that steadying presence, some scientists believe that Earth's tilt could shift far more dramatically over long stretches of time the way certain other planets in this solar system without a large moon of their own appear to have tilted at odd, unstable angles throughout their history. There is something quietly tender in that thought, that the moon, so often admired simply for its light, has spent billions of years doing something far less visible, holding the Earth steady, keeping its lean, gentle and consistent so that the seasons could unfold the same way year after year, generation after generation, long enough for life to build itself around a rhythm it could actually trust. The mind quietly registers a certain comfort in learning this. That stability, real stability, is so often the product of something patient and unseen, working quietly in the background, asking for no attention at all. None of this needs to be remembered now. It is simply enough to feel it softly, the way you might feel the last warmth of a fire long after the flames themselves have gone quiet. The night is settling now. The turning continues the way it always has. Somewhere a sunrise is arriving, somewhere else a sky is darkening into evening, and here in this particular moment there is only this, only rest. There is nothing more to learn tonight, nothing more to hold. The facts can rest now too, loosening, gently drifting somewhere just out of reach the way distant sound softens before it disappears completely. You do not need to remember the wind or the tides or the deep iron heart of the earth. You do not need to remember any of the words spoken tonight, only the feeling of being carried gently, steadily, the way you have always been carried without ever needing to notice it. Somewhere far below you the earth is still turning, somewhere far above you the sky is still quiet. And here, right now, there is nothing left to do. Only breathe, only settle, only let the weight of the day soften a little more and a little more. The dark is not empty. It never was. It is only still, only patient, only waiting gently the way it always has. Let your thoughts loosen now. Let them drift the way light drifts at the edge of evening. Softer, slower, further away. There is nowhere else to be, nothing else to hold, only this quiet, only this turning, Only this soft, unhurried dark carrying you gently towards sleep. Somewhere a light is fading, somewhere the world is turning toward morning. And here in this moment there is only rest, only stillness, only the quiet, endless turning of the world carrying you softly into sleep.